So welcome everyone. As we're settling in, I am going to do a poll to see if there's anyone new with us today. I know it's our last session, but sometimes people hear about this class at the very end. We did have someone last month who was new, so I do want to just kind of open that up to everyone. And while you're doing so, we do have a welcome with a quote from Louisa Moats that's just, I think, a really great reminder to us all that we need to make sure our kids have the skills they need, regardless of how old they are. And so we need to make sure that they have that ample opportunity to apply those skills in meaningful text reading, and I would add writing to it as well. All right, looks like we have 88% participated. No one's saying that they're new yet. I'll just go ahead and keep that going in the meantime in the background, as long as it's not too distracting. If I'm wrong, just let me know. I can move it out of the way. I don't know if you can. We do start with the tribal land acknowledgement. I did grab a link from one of my colleagues about Alaskan way of knowing. Actually, no, I put two. That's an older one I did. I didn't put today's in there. I will go to our resources and share today's resource on land acknowledgement. An Indigenous peacemaking video. I'll grab that link for us. But as a reminder that I did put this into the chat box, and Effie can copy and paste the attendance and this link for anything else that you'd like to grab from our resources for today. And is there anything else that anybody would like to add on about our tribal acknowledgement before we get started? I went ahead and stopped the poll. We have no one new. It was 9 out of 9, 100%. So I'll go ahead and stop that. And move on to our equity. This is our equity statement from OSPI. And our pain and racism recognition statement as well. We don't have anyone new, so I will just kind of share the resources. I did find one that fits. This month is the AAPI Heritage Month resources. So I'll add that in as well. Although that's a little bit more fitting with this is we have to keep bringing up the voices and not only the equity when we talk about literacy and making sure that we are reaching everyone's needs, but also the recognition of the background experiences of our students. And to say the names of those who are not getting justice, and we hope for justice for that poor young 11-year-old who was recently, I don't know if you read or heard, who had the cops, his mom called the cops to say that there's a situation because of domestic violence, I think it was. The cops came and said to everyone, come out. The boy did, and he got shot. 11 years old. We need to do better, don't we? We do recognize and remind us that this is in the framework of our MTSS model. So noticing that we have the simple view of MTSS, if you want to call it, of the systems and structures. And this is just a reminder as we think about the individuals who are here. Some of you are teachers, but some of you are that management or the administration that looks into the bigger picture of the systems. And so it takes all of us working together. Notice the multiplication symbol. We need both the systems and structures, and we need the instructional routines, our differentiated instruction, our understanding about structured literacy, and we need our specific interventions in order to make sure that everyone is moving forward in our literacy programs that reach all students. And here are the people who can support you along the way. And here's our focus today. Some reminders. We do ask that you share openly, that you listen openly. We stay engaged. We expect and accept non-closure. This has been a fun year together. And we are talking about doing it again next year, trying to figure out whether or not we can do it for free or whether we'll charge. We'll try to keep the price down as little as possible. It depends on how much funding we can get from our OSPI partners. So we're still working on those details, but we do have people who've learned about it at the end. So we definitely want to remind us that there's always more to learn. So I loved hearing what Melissa was talking about of getting her school district involved and engaged in syntax and semantics and what are the other pieces that we need to make sure we're paying attention to. I think most people have already added in your district name, but if you haven't yet, please take this moment to do so. If you don't remember, I mean, you may not be doing this as often as we used to, but you access their participants, go to your name, the more option there to rename, and then put your name and your district. Thank you for all of you who have already, please, who haven't, please take a moment to do so. I'm seeing some familiar faces, but I don't have everyone written down on my list to see where you're joining us from. And I think it helps to give us some context as you're sharing. A few other pieces while you're doing that. The mute is how you can, thanks Tammy, how you can contribute and join in. The reactions is where you can please raise hand electronically. So you'll notice the electronic raise hand option there. Unless you were Effie or Tammy, I can't see you. I'll have to arrow through, and actually nobody else has their videos on. So please use the raised hand electronically to contribute. We'll make sure that we all can have your voices heard, because we can't learn from each other if we can't hear from each other. The annotations we'll be asking you to do in a moment, so you can access that through via view options. When you hit annotate, it brings up this toolbar, and this little format option, whoops, I need to move that over, will change what color you are using. All right, yes, we will. Thank you, Effie, for getting the attendance, and maybe the resource guide would be helpful as well. So speaking of, we do have opportunities for engaging. We put some prompts into the Jamboard for discussion today. I will put the Jamboard into the chat. There's also a map if you haven't put yourself on previously. And of course, we will have breakout discussions and chat opportunities as well. Thanks, Effie. All right, so as we're starting a warm up, we know it's our last session together. June is around the corner. For many of us, in fact, I hope that for most, you have less than a month left. I did talk to somebody yesterday who, I think their last day is the 29th because of some snow days they need to make up for. This was up in Seattle. And at first I thought, well, you poor thing, but then I realized, well, it isn't really nice here until July anyway. So, but let's take a moment and say, what are you looking forward to the most? I love the middle one. That's actually from Effie. Do you go over to Sophie Island and go berry picking?
My husband was just looking for places to go berry picking. I was doing some research for him to go do that. It's a lot of like too much bending over for me to pick berries. So I send him.
I love the berry picking, and that's from in Sophie Island. We used to go to Bella Organics, and then we did Columbia Farms. I think that's from Columbia, and then we make pies and we make jams, and feel free to stamp it, folks. Do you like going to the beach or going to lakes, or I think that might be ocean kayaks, but it looks awfully calm. Spending time in the woods. Those are actually my kids when they were a bit younger. Relaxing with friends, or reading a book, or hammock time. What are we looking forward to? Definitely more time with friends. Paddleboarding, yay. Yes, that'll be me. Effie, you should come up for a day on the lake. Anyone, come on over. No, we've got someone's put in a heart. Thank you for contributing. I don't know if Melanie, you erased your heart and put it over, or somebody else accidentally erased when there was a heart on the beach. I agree. Some relaxing time to read, catch up on your novels. Effie, which one speaks to you?
Mine's a little different there. I put that I'll be concert hopping and visiting colleges. So a little more of a road trip type photo. But right now I am reading, we were talking about this earlier today, Lessons in Chemistry. So I am reading a book, and I'm looking forward to doing some more reading this summer. That's pleasure reading.
I see a couple of people have put in reading as well. Sleeping, reading, relaxing. Thanks everyone, just for a little bit of a right brain warm up to get us together. All right, Go ahead and clear all that off again. There we go. I think that we don't have anyone new yet. If I'm wrong, please just put a, hey, I'm new, call out in the chat. So I think you know all of us. Effie and I are the only ones that we know of available today. Nina may be able to, it depends on what time her vet appointment is over, and Heidi and Elizabeth, they contributed in the background, but they weren't available to join us live today. So we do invite you to take a moment to, like we said, and on the Jamboard, you can put where you're from. I'll demonstrate that. You could also put it into the chat box, your name, your role, your grade level, content area. That's just for a moment to take a look at who's in the room. I will show you where at the top of your resources you can access the Jamboard, not with your stamping item. I've got to click back to mouse. We'll make that go away. And up at the top, there is the access to the Jamboard. See the Jamboard for all sessions. And in the Jamboard, I think it's frame 2 is the map. And looks like people are starting to jump in there. Frame 1 is just kind of introducing, so we can, we have Fran McCarthy who helped with some of our planning as well. And then frame 2 is the map, so you can share us where you're from. And frame 3 is a parking lot if you have questions or things that you want to make sure that we address at some point. Especially since today's our last time, feel free to use it and add in things either there or in the chat. So speaking of our last time, this has been our journey together this year. We've done a lot. It's funny because sometimes you feel like, okay, once a month, it's not all that much content, but when you look at it this way, it really is. So we've talked about standards and assessments and text choices, connected texts. We talked about text sets, building awareness of the science of reading and structured literacy. Went into the word reading strand with decoding and encoding, and then the language comprehension strand. We looked at the reading and writing connection, looked particularly at syntax and text structures, talked about fluency and reading strategically. And today, I mean, it's funny, when we looked at this, we looked at tools and strategies, we felt like we were trying to do that all along the way. So we surveyed you to see what are some of the things that you want to make sure that we touch on before closing off. So this is our agenda. Although I did add a quotation marks to new later on because it's more reminders on some of these. So I think I'm going to pass it to Effie, if you're comfortable, Effie, for the review, reflect, and connect time.
Okay.
And then we'll go back and forth in the new learning, and we'll have do breakout choices for the practice time.
Okay. Let me get. I'm trying to.
That's okay. We can help. We can
Adjust my screen on my other screen here. So I think
this was last month where we talked about
I
fluency and strategic reading.
Okay, so you can go to the next slide. So it's all coming back to me now. So in the quotes of my musical references to Celine Dion, it's all coming back to me now. And looking and thinking about last month and thinking about the work we talked about with fluency, and that it's more than just, reading quickly. It has the thinking about accurate reading with rate and expression, and really thinking about what it sounds like to be a strong reader. So thinking about the demands of content area reading for secondary students. And, the question is always, how accurate is accurate enough? And thinking about the vocabulary that ties into that students are able to decode and understand, as it leads a fluent reader, leads to a more advanced comprehension. The simple analogy I tend to bring in is, that of riding a bike. If you ride it too fast, you're going to probably crash. If you ride it too slow, you're going to probably fall off. So how do you find that just right, that Goldilocks level of reading to be able to stay on that bike and make it through so you can see the countryside. I just rode bikes not very well in the beginning, but I got up back on and did it through Central Park on a trip to New York for spring break. So that's why the bike reading analogy is like very
Well, it's
fresh.
funny you use that because we use this as well, the three-legged stool one.
Right.
But
So then we have our three-legged stool, so you don't want to fall off. So you have the fluency in there, and then again, your accuracy and your rate, and then the expression and the prosody, and really reading the conventions. And that's when we turn this over into writing as well. If we are good at reading our conventions as readers, we will be better, students will be better at writing using conventions, which again then turns into voice. And it's just so many things cycle back around that when we look at them as connected, it's really exciting to think, okay, I'm teaching one thing, but really I'm teaching so much more than that.
I love how you said that. I'll let you do this next one if you want, but and I'll pull the whole thing up. Whoops, she went too far. That when you're saying that we are working on writing when we're working on reading, it's a yes and to me, because it's to a degree, if we are really paying attention and we can think about the orthographic mapping, and we're connecting the sounds in the words to the writing, or we're thinking about the conventions as we are writing, that or reading, because for me it's the other way around so much more. We teach reading through writing rather than writing through reading. It's a yes and though, I think. Anything you want to add to about this one? This is something from last month when we just kind of, I think this is a good reminder for us that the emphasis on orthographic mapping, just seeing those words and hearing them simultaneously is not enough to make that solid so that you can have that automatic word recognition.
Okay, so I'm going to bring in my example I shared this morning. I think I can tie it in here with my daughter in the car yesterday, making sure the door's closed here. She was, those of you familiar, there's a pizza place called Pizza Schmitza, and we were driving back from Clackamas Town Center yesterday in Portland, and she saw the sign, and she said, and this is this highly verbal, bilingual 17-year-old, and she said, "Mom, what's this pizza schmahitza?" And I said, "It's Pizza Schmitza." And we spent a good 10 minutes, I think, on the drive home, really talking about the word Schmitza. And because I know she's a strong reader, I was able to jump to that orthographic mapping and say, I want you to picture in your mind breaking out the syllables of Schmitza and Schmitza, and because she kept saying Smashitza. And so it was really interesting to take that nonsense word, which reiterates a lot of work we do with nonsense words in the primary grades to make sure students have those word attack decoding skills. But that she was able then to, and I said, break it into the syllables, and I want you to listen to so basically the phonological elements of it, because we were in the car. But I then tried to move her into the phonics by imprinting that she already has in her brain. So to me, that was just like orthographic mapping of a made up word.
But that illustrates, I love when you mentioned you brought up the nonsense words, how we use them in the younger grades, but they're useful in the older grades to make sure that the schools that they use. I love that the free nonsense word test you can find online has a multisyllabic element. When I taught high school, there wasn't a multisyllabic good nonsense word test, so I would get out Shakespeare or Edgar Allan Poe, something I knew the kids had never seen before, and see how to attack a word you've never seen.
Well, and that just proved it too. She's, like I said, she's a 17-year-old student that is in AP classes and bilingual, and she's struggled with that made up word. And so that I thought, for more advanced vocabulary for her in her science classes and whatnot, this is a really good word attack to really lesson for her. And it was simply through an observation of her own with Pizza Schmizza.
Thanks, Effie. I think that's a great kind of
Real life example.
Yeah, because I mean, that's the accuracy piece, I guess you would look at from this here. Is, are your kids reading accurately? Are they reading automatically? And then, of course, with the prosody, the expression, that the emphasis is well more than fast. I think that's a nice one as well. Because as they're developing, we think about what do we really need to do? We need to make sure that they're sounding them out like your daughter was trying to do with Pizza
Schmizza.
So we had to stop, get it right. And then if it's really important to her to read Schmizza, she could have repeated practice to do that.
Well, then we came home and she tried to tell my husband and she's like, no, Mom, don't give me the word. I am going to get it. So she worked on then retrieving it from her practice earlier.
That's lots of repeated practice. And that's one of the things I think it's hard as secondary teachers, we don't often hear our kids read out loud. I was lucky I had a special ed class I had a smaller class than most of my gen ed colleagues. How do we make sure that we have these opportunities to make sure that they can actually read accurately so that they're not, so they're getting it right? I think that's one of the big pieces. And I think that kind of goes into these levels of understanding we were talking about from Nancy Hennessy's Reading Comprehension Blueprint last month. And this ties into something we're planning on later when we're talking about
Surface.
Yeah, well, is it the surface code or is it the deeper code?
So just take a moment to read this slide.
When I think about successive units of meaning, I think about how much more complex the texts and the sentences can be for our secondary students. Everyone else can jump into and chime in if there's something that connects to you as we're going through these. We'll give you a moment to talk to each other shortly in breakout rooms. We want to open the door for these discussions while these slides are in front of us. When I see this units of meaning, I think of the phrases and clauses and prepositional phrases that can be really complicated.
Yeah, and it also reminds me of this morning when we were talking with Elizabeth here in the planning, and I mentioned I was reading Lessons in Chemistry. If many of you are probably familiar with this book, and it's and the way it's written with referring to what would be tier 3 vocabulary in specifically around chemistry, I don't stop and look up all those terms. And so what Elizabeth had said is it provides me that choice. However, there was a word that I felt impacted the meaning of the text for me. So I stopped and looked it up on my phone while I was reading the book. And it was just more of a general word that I was less familiar with. I needed that word. And then the other words, I just kind of don't always look them up because there's a lot of technical language that isn't quite necessary for my understanding of the text, because it is a novel, not something I'm trying to go into a chemistry classroom and do. So then there's that making meaning from the text and understanding the meaning units by making those choices of what's important to me and how we help students understand to make those decisions on what's actually important to spend time digging deeper in and what's a surface understanding is good enough.
Integrating. Do I need to keep it? Do I need to discard it? How can I make it collaborate it or connect it with what I've already learned?
And this is a whole different conversation around reading than I ever really imagined thinking about and having many years ago. It's great.
Love to hear more.
Yeah.
That'd be a fun one to go deeper into. These are some of the strategies we shared and talked about. We brought some from the IES guide. I'll put that in the chat box again for those of you who weren't with us last time. The engagement opportunity is offering for those to add on and see if there are some strategies that you use that you would add to this list. Again, thinking about how to make sure that your kids are engaged and strategic as they're writing, thinking about how to activate and connect to their prior knowledge, and thinking about predictions, adding notes and annotations. I love using sticky notes or as I'm reading of something I can't, if it's something I can't write all over and underline and highlight, whatever, some making sticky notes you can and annotate them. Questioning, visualizing, monitoring, clarifying, fixing up. Inferences are really hard for some of our kids, as well as summarizing, because it's really identifying what's that main point.
There you go, Melissa. This is from the Big Dippers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't remember why we have an asterisk on that. Do you?
I think we have a note down below that just you just did it with the IES guide, tying it to that.
Thank you. All right, well, we are going to invite you to have some connection and discussion as you think about what we talked about last month, which was specifically the fluency and text types. As I was pausing thinking, did we update that? Yes, we did. I did make the rooms while you were talking earlier.
Oh, good. Okay.
So I'm just going to make sure that I do have 2 rooms with Battleground. Oh, somehow we have some rooms of 2. Let me make them, each room have 3 or 4, except Battleground, I only have 2 of you, unless there are people who are also from Battleground who have not indicated such on your Zoom name. So, but I think, Mark, you said more people were in your room, so you could just shut off and have your conversation that way. So I'm going to pause, resume recording, and move to our whole group sharing. What were some of the things you talked about in your breakout rooms about fluency and the discussion and the slides? Who would like to start? I think we had 3 or 4 rooms.
I'll start. I'm really the only one who's working on fluency. We've done still a little bit more work on breaking the words down into prefix, root, suffix. And I tested a couple of my seniors who are leaving, soon to finish up their progress notes, and was pleasantly surprised to see that they've been making progress, even though it's not something we're hitting a ton. So that was good. And then Stephanie was like, well, I teach math, I'm not really working on it. And we talked about the ways that she actually is, and word problems, like her kids have a dictionary, she's not talking about necessarily like fluency reading fast, but like they have a dictionary to help identify like add, subtract, multiply, divide, all the reference words to help like break that word problem down into and translate it into a mathematical sentence that they can then solve. So we talked about that.
Well, because there's fluency with it, with the content as well, and getting fluent and comfortable with those terms.
Yeah. So that's what we talked about there.
Thanks, Stacy. Stephanie, are you a math teacher? But we're all
Yes,
at the
I
same
am.
time. I was gonna say, we're all reading and writing teachers too, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Because we do read and write in all the topic areas, don't we? Thank you for adding that on. How about another group?
I was sharing with my group that we've been doing I've been running a Power Up pilot with Lexia Power Up in our middle school intervention, and a couple of our schools have middle school intervention. And so they've included fluency as part of I did a training in the very beginning on the pillars of literacy and the things that are most effective for adolescent intervention. And so they've all added fluency in as part of their routine. So they've been doing that all of second semester, and our kids have actually shown some really nice growth.
Thank you, Tammy. Appreciate that. I didn't know that Lexia went to middle school as well. I only know of people using it in elementary.
Yeah, they have a Power Up is their secondary version, and it's designed for 6th through 12th grade.
Is it mostly one-on-one or for the kids to do on the computer, like Lexia?
Yeah, it's like core 5. It's very similar to core 5. It has the 3 strands, or it's grammar and comprehension and word work.
Mhm.
But it's you can tell that it's designed for more mature students. So it's engaging for them somewhat, as much as it can be, and it's designed to be a balance, or where they have the teacher does small groups too.
Mhm.
So it's kids on the computers, some kids are doing skill builders, and then the teacher is delivering mini lessons.
Thank you for sharing, Tammy. I appreciate that. How about one of the other 2 groups? Is there another one who would like to share? I mentioned it to this group or not, but I heard recently someone say introverts need 17 seconds of silence before they might include. I'm obviously not one of those. But I do invite you to raise your hand or come jump in at any time. Tammy, as you were talking, it made me think one of the biggest challenges, I think that's one of the things we're going to talk about in a moment, is the grouping, and how do you find the time to do that in the very small typical secondary class period of 45 to 55 minutes. It boggles my mind. I was lucky when I taught high school. I taught at a school where we had block schedules. So each class was 95 minutes, and you had the time to do so many different in-depth, deep reading, surface reading, small groups, independent. I mean, you had the time to do that stuff. I just look at it now and think, oh, I can't. We sometimes had a short day where, like, if we had an early release or late start, and we'd have to do shortened periods. And I thought, how do people get things done? All right, well, let's get into the quote unquote new learning. I put the quotes because it's really reminders, especially because some of them, when Heidi pulled in some from previous sessions, and I think that there were things that we wanted to address that are really kind of just reminders, but maybe we're going to look at them through a new lens. We're going to talk about orthographic mapping. These are topics that came from the survey. Orthographic mapping, semantics, morphology and decoding, and instructional routines or groups or tools for identifying the meeting needs. And Effie and I are going to kind of go back and forth on these 2. So we're going to start with the orthographic mapping, which you saw reference to on this slide. Remember that orthographic mapping piece, but there was an interest in going a little bit deeper and a little bit, making sure that we're clear and understanding what that means and how to build it, particularly at the secondary level. So one of the things that you may have seen in the past is that the orthographic mapping is really, I guess, the pinnacle, if you want to say, of our reading development. And this is all influenced by phonemic awareness. So you really want to make sure your kids can manipulate phonemes in order to be able to do the orthographic mapping piece, which is, as I mentioned earlier with the example, I think Effie was saying the pizza schmitzas, it's just thinking about what are the sounds, what are the sounds in that? How would you attach them to the symbols? So you've already read this word. She finally figured it out. It's schmitza. Now, how are those sounds represented in the I would assume SCHMIZZA? But that's then how, when I see it again, I'll remember it without having to pronounce it to decode it and figure it out again. Anything you wanted to add, Effie?
No, you got that right. SCHMIZZA. But yeah, and even I wasn't so concerned about the SCH, because it sounded even if like grabbing onto the SH at first to make it easier, and then
Yeah, you're right.
broadening,
Then
bringing the C in. I said SH, and then I said actually it's SCH, and then she was able to grab onto that.
It could be either way. SH or S. Yeah.
The way they have it is SCH. So
it's like, well, if they're looking at a Greek origin or a French origin, or but it is that process of, again, noticing what were the sounds what were the spellings of that sound? So in that case, the schmitza, we talked about that. And one of the things I like to highlight is that it's the same process if your word is regular, like in sit, or if it's a little bit more irregular, like in sight, where there's more than one way to spell that sound. You'll notice that in the first case of sight, it's spelled with this I consonant E. And the second case, the I is spelled with the IGH. And this is where my knowledge of what the word means is so crucial for me to figure out which one when I'm writing. But for reading, it's easy because they both translate to the same pronunciation, sight and sight. Now I have to think about in my differentiation, I'm trying to go back and forth of what is the meaning. So which one does this mean? That's where your kids will say, is this the one that has to do with what you see? Or is this the one that have to do with what you see? And this is a place. So this is where meaning comes in and is so much more crucial in that orthographic mapping piece. How do I support it at the older kids? Number one, as I mentioned, with it, especially in to achieve orthographic mapping, you want to make sure that your kids have proficiency with phonemes. That I had taught even high schoolers who struggle with phonemic awareness. And when I say proficiency, they're able to change clash to crash and time to tie and flat to fat. They're able to make those adjustments really quickly and easily. And this is just a kind of a base that in order to really remember what you read and not have to sound it out every time, you need to get good with the phonemes. The sound symbol proficiency, we mentioned that a little bit, is really making sure that you can translate those symbols to the sounds and vice versa. Here are some other strategies. These came from David Kilpatrick's book, Equipped for Reading Success. If you have kids who really, really want to just whole word memorize and not slow down and pay attention to every letter that's there, have them read it backwards or write it backwards for them, write it vertically. Write it in mixed fonts or cases, have the spacing have 0 spaces together or way too spaced out so that it forces them to look at the letters that are there and they can't jump to that whole word. Tammy mentioned words, I think it was Tammy, or maybe it was Stacy, the word structural analysis, breaking down into what are the morphemes, what are the in this case, analysis, and your base word here is analyze. How is analyze related to analysis? How does my pronunciation change from analyze, accent here, to analysis, accent here? And then, of course, having them do lots of writing and spelling. Effie, I'm going to pass it to you for semantics.
Okay. So thinking about semantics, and, I find myself quite often talking about using that word. We were just during the breakouts talking about something and I said, oh, it's semantics. Oh, Alicia and I were talking about where to house something. And I said, OneDrive. And she said, tell me more about OneDrive. And I said, I don't mean OneDrive. I actually mean in OneDrive. And so then I had to go back and say, I mean, like in a folder. And so I said,
OneDrive versus OneDrive.
OneDrive. And so I said, oh, there's some semantics going on there. So we find ourselves saying that. So it's about that meaning of language. And it's interesting to think about it being entire text. I'm more familiar with using it with single words. But so for example, destination and last stop technically mean the same thing, but students of semantics could analyze that, and you might use last stop in one circumstance, but destination in another as an example. So
when I was reading this and hearing you, I thought, some people call a PhD a terminal degree, but it's called, using the word terminal degree is so different from a terminal disease. If you have a terminal disease, you're going to die from it. But a terminal degree means you're not going to get any further ones because you've got your doctorate. There isn't a degree ahead of that. So it's another one where you're like, how are you using that word? But when you said entire text, I was thinking of lexical semantics being the single word, or sentential semantics being sentences, and of course, paragraphs as well.
Okay, here's something, a quote, excerpt from if you're familiar with Natalie Wexler and the knowledge gap. So I'm just going to go ahead and let you read that slide. So thinking about how syntax and semantics work together.
Mhm. The more complex the syntax, the harder it is to understand the semantics, the
Yes.
point and meaning behind it.
Mhm. So
This one-
sometimes we have
oops.
to go back and read, sometimes just that rereading to make sure we're understanding the whole piece. You can go ahead.
Okay. This one came from Nancy Hennessy's Reading Comprehension Blueprint. I think I mentioned that already today.
Which I just ordered and is on my desk.
There's actually a book study that I saw online through Pennsylvania IDA branch. I think it's $25 for the book study, where they're going through that book starting the 20th of June.
Wow.
Although I've been considering doing a book study of my own next year. We'll see. Again, how are we going to figure it all out? So this is, I think, what I like is that when we think about the semantics, particularly at the word level, that's where I mentioned the lexical semantics. How do we know a word? How do we know what it means? And as Louisa Moat says again and again, that the more different ways we know words, the more it will stick into our heads, the more we'll understand them and remember them. So Stephanie, as a math teacher, if you talk about divide and division, and then the student goes to their history class and they talk about the division of labor or the division of government, and those are additional ways to understand that word, because so many of our words in our language are polysemous, or I don't know if that's pronounced polysemous or polysemous, but more than one meaning. So if you think about that, I'll put the word up. So we think about poly meaning many, semus, you can see much, there we go, meaning connected to semantics. So that, see the SEM there, the same is the same connected to semantics. Most of our words, division is a great one. I mean, biology, the division of cells. I mean, you have to think about this word is in so many different contexts. And what does it mean in that context? I mean, if you think of politics and the connotations of calling a woman pushy, calling a man pushy, it's very different or aggressive. Or if you think of the difference between a statesman and a politician, these are all things when we talk about semantics. I'm not sure if we talked about these in a previous session or not, but I'm looking for faces going, I think about these in so many different ways. I just want to make sure that I'm not either duplicating or not going too quickly if I need to slow down. But I heard Stacy mention morphemes and really paying attention to the prefixes and the suffixes and the roots. When I'm talking about semantic categories, if I'm talking about if we're going to go to biology, and if I'm talking about zygotes, those are kinds of cells, and cells are found in etc. As you can think of, or if I'm talking about larch and birch, those are kinds of trees. So there's, when I'm talking about semantic categories, is what does this fit under, and how do I categorize this so that I can, that's how we make sense of our world. The connotation is, again, I mentioned those feelings. The syntax is that grammatical class. And division is an easy one. When I'm talking about to divide is an action, that's a verb. But if I talk about the division of something, now it's a noun. How am I using that? And of course, how my figurative use can be even, how is it used in this context? And I think the example that Effie and I were talking about with OneDrive versus one drive is another example of how words can be different in different tenses and uses.
And that's a constant change, because you think about OneDrive being a proper noun and OneDrive being a single drive.
Mm-hmm. And then beyond the word level, when you mentioned, Effie, thinking about going beyond the word level, where do we think about meaning in the phrases, noun phrases and verb phrases and prepositional phrases, and how that quote from Natalie Wexler, if we think about how much more complex the text is, particularly in clauses and phrases, we use appositives, we use gerunds, we use things much more in a much more complex way with our older kids than when we do with our younger kids. And so, but so often we expect them to just follow along with us without noticing the reference or the words that we've replaced or the words that we've left out, because so we don't repeat ourselves. And that's one of the things I think we have to really pay attention to with our older learners is what's not in the text that's implied. That's something a lot of our kids need help with. And then, of course, you can see the going up from the phrase level, clause, sentence to text. Anything you want to add on this, Effie? My apologies. I thought I was leaving you this section, but they were my fault.
No, it's fine. It's fine. No, that's good. I'm good.
This I think came from you. You wanna-
Yeah, this is something I came across that I added in here in thinking about semantic properties. I thought was entertaining and made the point. In the sentence, the assassin killed Thwacklehurst. Knowledge of the word assassin includes knowing that the individual to whom that word refers. So thinking about the word assassin, and that we understand that assassin has these elements, that it is a human, it is a murderer, it is a killer of important people. So is a murderer and is a killer of important people. That's our typical understanding of assassin. The semantic properties are the components of the meaning of the word. So the meaning of all content words, then nouns, adjectives, verbs, and adverbs. And some of the function words can be specified by such properties. So, and again, it's taking that deeper level of, we might read it, we make those connections, we've seen, 007 movies, we connect with the word assassin. We've heard that where students might know it means to kill somebody, but not the detailed levels of the typically that they have all these other elements. So that was just one example that I found.
We have the background knowledge. Or we think about the assassination of presidents or some of those pieces. And so it is, you're right. There's a fine line between a murderer and an assassin. And I think that third bullet is really what you're talking about there.
Yep.
So on the morphology and decoding piece, this is one I think one of our colleagues put in, because I don't recognize some of this, but that decoding is the process of translating words from print to speech by matching letters and their combinations to the sounds they make. This is something we've talked about a lot, and I do have some reminders. And then morphology is that recognition, understanding, and use of the word parts that Stacy brought up, the prefixes, suffixes, and I actually don't like the term roots myself, because I go into the history of words a lot. So I would call the history of the word its root. I would call these bases. So for example, in the word prefix, I have a prefix here, and I have a suffix here, and my base is fix, because things are attached to them. Prefixes get attached to the beginnings, suffixes get attached at the end. And so I call them those. Personally, I call them bases, but it really is the same thing. I've seen them completely interchangeable. We do have some sources and resources in the notes I'll put into the chat box for you. And we will also make sure that these are all on our reference list for you as well. So I'll put all those in. And we'll get to some quick definition or some quick practice of that and give you an opportunity to have a conversation as well as then share with each other. So this was just a reminder of, remember when we talked about with morphology and syntax, that we're making sure that we are translating the print into spoken language, because remember that print is a representation of speech that is imperfect but predictable, so that then we could understand it as if someone were to read it to us. Clear all that off, because I can then take this this equation that we see here, this simple view of reading, and broaden it out into those skills that we need to understand in order to read fluently with comprehension. So you'll notice on this first side here, my oral language and my vocabulary skills, which contribute to my language comprehension, but they also contribute to my ability to read words fluently, figuring those words out, my word recognition. And all of those, of course, contribute to the ability to do those automatically and fluent with it, with fluency, and to understand what I'm reading. Because as I mentioned, what we see in print is not just the sounds, there's so much more. As I said, it's an imperfect representation. We're looking at spelling patterns and conventions. We're looking, remember the word that I used earlier, analyze, coming in, and analysis, and how those words change when I'm adding on suffixes, both in the pronunciation and in the meaning, and how I might use it. It's grammatical class as well. So these are some reminders. I mean, we know we've talked about these before, but we thought they would be good, fit well when we're talking about morphemes. As is this one, we brought this in before, but we did not divide them. And so this is one that you can come back to if you want to, and I can put it into the RGM board, but I'll just bring up the divisions for us to just kind of talk about briefly all together. And maybe Effie, could you grab the resources that in the chat for that? So a reminder of, here are some words that use just closed syllables. In that sunset and wombat, we've got the closed U and the closed E. Those ones are easier for our kids. Then we have our long vowels here, the hero and tutu. I didn't do name because it's a single syllable word, but I will draw it here just to help kids if they remind them that the A consonant E is what makes that long A, just like the I consonant E in lime and the O consonant E in stone. And then we've got our vowel R's. We've got actually 2 here and the 2 here. We have our vowel teams, or you can call them vowel digraphs, the AI, the OW, the OU, etc., etc. And we have our consonant LE here in ample and bugle, our consonant E syllables. When we're talking about prefixes, suffixes, again, this is a reminder. I just think it's a great way to go through and just kind of get us all on the same page. Remembering that when we are decoding, these are strategies that I actually use with my kids when they were struggling to sound words out. Let's get out your pencil and just draw your lines in between to decode them. Let's box our suffixes. Let's recognize your base word was sun. I doubled that N when I added my suffix that began with a Y. My base word here, glad, I didn't double because gladly starts with a consonant. Sunny starts with a vowel. Same thing here, rarely, I did not drop my E because my suffix started with a consonant. Whereas save, I dropped my E because I needed to add on a suffix begin with a vowel. I have now here joyful and denied. I could just add on the FUL because I have a vowel Y here. But here I had to change the Y to I. So it's actually denied. I'll put the Y down there because my suffix doesn't start with an I and I have a consonant before the Y. Otherwise, it would be D-E-N-Y-E-D. We just don't do that. We have a Y. That's that Y to I change in the middle of words. And then, of course, lastly, even though I have a consonant before the Y here, I don't change the Y to an I because otherwise I'd have 2 I's next to each other, and we just don't do that in our language. So some of those things that we can remember and help our kids, both with their reading and with their orthographic mapping, their spelling of all these. This is one from Heidi, who put in, this is from the Dyslexia Help from University of Michigan. I love that site. A lot of really good resources. And she's talking about explicitly teaching students that affixes are extra parts that are fixed on. Remember, I said the base word fix, and so these get added on to the root, if you want to call it, or base. That they're at the beginning, that they're called pre because it means before. We've kind of talked about these a little bit. And I love how you can think about how would you match these? So I could do doable, perhaps. I could do moody. I could do pinkish. I could do tempting. I could do sadly. Treatable, like a treatable disease, or treatment. We'll put it down here. I could do grateful. Notice I didn't do grated because I'd have to drop an E. I have a movement. Aggravate, I don't see a consonant suffix. Aggravation I could do, but I have to drop my E. So think about ways that you can help support your students in their recognition of what these words mean. Oh, I could do lovely here. So how can you connect these and build words that make sense? All right, and our last section was about grouping and meeting needs. I'm going to pass it to you, Effie.
Okay. So, okay, so this really got me thinking, and we're gonna provide some breakout time to have you discuss this, but thinking about the identification of student needs. So basically thinking about what kind of data is collected, formative and diagnostically. A lot of times we have screening tools, but really thinking about how do we dig into the student's need, listening to students read, capturing what's actually happening with their reading, because there's so many different reasons, as we know, why a student might not perform as well as they should be at that grade level. It's just not consistent. Every reader is a little different. What kinds of errors do they make? So thinking about that, are they multisyllabic words? Are they dropping endings? Are they skipping high frequency words? Are they substituting words? There's all kinds of different types of errors that are they slowed down, but they go back and they fix the errors themselves. So then what kind of intervention do we need for that? Talk to students about what they've read. What is the depth of their understanding? Are they able to give you that synopsis and make sure that they understand the type of text they're reading? Is it able to provide you a narrative summary, or are they able to go back and find bulleted concepts from a nonfiction text that they might use to do some writing? And
Effie, before you go to the next one, this is why we made this slide.
oh yeah,
Thinking about the
Yeah.
surface versus the deep understanding.
So thinking about that surface reading, sometimes things are meant to be skimmed. Sometimes we read quickly for information, and sometimes we go deep in understanding that and making those associations. We were talking about, as we were working through this, thinking about recipes. And if you're, I made cookies on the weekend. I made them, many, many times. I actually didn't have all the right ingredients for what I wanted to make. So I adapted a couple things, but I was able to skim through the recipe and know, I know the flour and the baking soda and everything goes separate. But I was like, part of it I had to think about. But if it was a recipe I've never made before, and I'm not an exceptional cook yet. But I've baked a lot. So that would be different for me. I really have to read those recipes closer and deeper, especially if they involve multiple, I don't even know what they're called, burners on the stove and the oven. And there's timing involved and all of those things. So I'm going to have to dig and read deeper. And make those connections that, oh yeah, I can make pasticcio, I've made lasagna, that type of thing. Pasticcio being a Greek dish. Or
Thinking about
Alicia's benefit there. So thinking about how we look at that with the surface. Also, I was jokingly saying, I go down those Wikipedia rabbit holes when I'm watching a movie and I see an actor and I think they look familiar. So I'll start digging and looking. Yeah, that's surface reading. I'm not like really analyzing that to remember it. I'm just looking at it for the here and now so that I can make those connections. So
I had a writing piece.
I'm sorry, what?
I added the writing one here.
Yeah.
Thinking about what spelling errors they make, we can see so much of their understandings. One is how, when they write about their reading, do they understand what they read? But are you going to be concerned about their orthographic mapping when you can see that in their spelling? And of course, last but
And
not least, is that relationships. piece.
Relationships.
Mhm.
Understanding your kids, understanding where they are. And we realize with secondary, you can be seeing many, many, many students in a day, which is very different from having your same students all day long and being able to build those relationships through multiple content areas and bring things back. That often in secondary, it's you got to do special things to build relationships with students in that short amount of time you have them every day.
But you do have them every day, and sometimes
Got them every day.
right. Well, and that kind of leads to, how do we get to know them more? How do we get to know their needs? And Effie and I put this in a bit ago about how do we make sure that we are getting the information and the data on our kids that we need? Are we still giving them a universal screener even in the secondary? Tammy, I think that you've talked about giving your kids a universal screener at the secondary level. Do you not? I would assume if you're using Lexia or that they have a universal screening part.
Not really. Lexia does. Yeah, they have something, but all of our kids don't get it. That was just a pilot to share with a few middle schools.
Well, I think that the idea, I mean, some people ask me, well, how do I know how my kids are doing? I'm sure when you start at the beginning of the year, even if it's a unit test, or when I started, granted, I was teaching special education, but I would give them some screeners at the beginning of the year to see whether or not they needed help, whether or not they needed, whether or not they were on track. Then the diagnostics that I would give them would be things like asking them to read Shakespeare or Edgar Allan Poe. I would give them something that I could see what skills they possessed and what they didn't. And then, of course, I could continue to monitor their progress on that, and that our outcome measure at the end of the year. I ready, even for secondary, I ready?
I just threw a couple things in here I want to mention when we're done with this slide.
What was that, Tammy?
We use it through 10th grade, but we may be getting rid of it for 9th and 10th next year.
I'd love to hear more. I mean, I think often about, is this outcome measure, their standard SBAG, is that the only thing we're doing? Because it really, how much does it inform our instruction? Or how are we doing things like a diagnostic or progress monitoring? What are we doing to inform so we know what our kids' needs are? I mean, I'm sure, Stephanie, you do the same thing with math, and whatever subjects areas we have, we find out what the kids know, what they need to know, and there we continue forward with that. Effie, did you want to talk to those resources before we?
Yeah, as we were talking about this and thinking about the previous slide that said building relationships with students, and then we jumped into the data piece. For those of you that might not be familiar with the book Street Data, and I'll add it to our resource list. But I also included in the chat the book as well as the podcast on cult of pedagogy with the authors. And this book is something that it was growth for me, because when I first started reading it and working for Vancouver Public Schools for 13 years, it's really hammered in know your students by name and need, know your students by name and need. So for me to read it, I was like, of course you know your students, of course you got relationships with your students. And but as I dug deeper, because I was kind of like, okay, I dug deeper, it took on a new meaning on connecting with the actual data and how you ask students for their input on their own education and their own learning experiences. And so now I have found myself quoting it or referring to it and saying, yeah. And so even I just did it again now in this it triggered, oh, street data. So thinking about, and it's a very structured way on how to get to know your students more than knowing them and that they, you know, they like ice mochas and cats. It's deeper than that. It's about what it means to them to be a learner to help them achieve their goals through the data we collect that's objective, and then this more subjective conversational data.
Thanks, Effie. I was looking around thinking, where's my copy? I haven't read it yet, but it's on my list.
I don't know where mine went. I think I loaned it to somebody. I don't know.
If anybody's interested, there was a great resource about this table comes from LDA at school, and I'll put that in. It just talks about the different purposes for our assessments and how we make sure we're getting the information. So it's just a nice table that follows this one as well. All right, so we're going to give you back another time, and I'm actually going to change the time this time. So we have about 10 minutes. It's because you don't need 14, so I'll make that down to 10 should work, maybe 11. And I did change the rooms a little bit so that there are 4 or 5, so you have more people to talk to. And Battleground, you're all still with each other. So instead of having 4 rooms of smaller, we have 3 rooms and they're a little bit bigger. Thank you, Tammy, I appreciate it. And so Jill, you as well. So I may have to do some rearranging as well once we, uh-oh, did I open that? No, let me see, room 1 down to 2. Let me fix those a little bit. So room 1 is going to be 3, room 2 has 4. Okay, I'm pausing the recording and we'll give you a chance to chat before I open up the breaking for our whole group sharing. And like I said, our next opportunity will be in choice breakouts for people to choose which room you want to talk about, whether you want to be with me or with Effie. It'd been ideal to have, thank you, Melanie, to have 4 rooms or even 5, but well, we do what we can, right, everyone? That's the nature of teaching. So who would like to start sharing some of the things you talked about in your rooms? Effie, you lead this and we'll let the dog out.
Okay, so I'm gonna give a little bit of wait time here, and if somebody wants to jump in, that would be great on thinking about that piece, those pieces of it.
Were there reminders? Were there some things that you came up in your conversation that you want to talk about? Hi, Stacy.
So, I mean, we talked a little bit about the segmenting, like that's familiar. I probably need more practice in doing that, and wanting to do that with students who actually want to do it. And I'm getting a student on my caseload next year who we just qualified her as a sophomore, but she self-referred herself.
Oh, wow.
I think somebody tried to refer her last year and her parents said no, but then when she referred herself, her parents started to listen. And so she actually has already sought me out because she knows I'm going to be her case manager. We just, in the last month, didn't want to switch her classes and all of that, but we're giving her accommodations. And so I think she's going to be amenable to like wanting to sit down and work on this, and that will give me more good practice with somebody who actually wants to do it. And that'll be helpful. And then just, we talked about the University of Michigan website that looks like it's really helpful. So
Thank you, Stacy.
well, thank you for that resource.
Appreciate that. I don't remember what group you were in, but how about one of the other 2 groups sharing?
I'd like to hear from my Battleground group if possible.
Angela's like, okay, I put
I'm
my
trying
video
to make
on.
sure I
Now
can
she
share
calls.
I
I
didn't
without
call
any
on you guys
feedback
last
off the
time.
the big computer.
I'm circling back.
I say this every meeting, so everyone knows, I'm sure, in the state of Washington now, that we just adopted new curriculum and it starts next year. So our group is doing a lot of talking about how we really kind of have an idea of the gaps that we have right now and how to get intervention in place. And morphology is a big deal with a lot of our struggle in middle school because we're not seeing really like the explicit instruction and vocabulary and breaking down words and the whole idea that we're really explicitly teaching tier 2 words. And so we're just having a lot of conversation about, because we spend a chunk of money on new curriculum, we don't have a lot of resources for intervention. And really, we don't have intervention teachers because we don't have anybody that's specialized enough to be able to do universal screeners, to be able to figure out these problems and then be able to solve the problems in the timeframes that we have. And so what's our, like, the biggest bang for our buck in a tier 1 sort of every kid can get it situation. And so then we were really talking about really trying to figure out a maybe like a structure or system that we can teach the morphology of words in our content areas across our building, and pick a strategy, just one, even just one, just one to use with everybody. And then pulling our intervention, we have, of course, we have iReady in our district, but pulling more specifically kids that we notice are struggling to read aloud, and then trying to figure out maybe some key indicators. There's a couple of tests that I noticed. The blueprint is one of the things that we're scouring, and Natalie Wexler's book. There's a Melissa and Lori Love Literacy, and Dr. Stephen Dykstra was on episode 100 on their podcast, and he talked a lot about how basically kids are stressed. He calls it shame fatigue, where once they can't read, they struggle with reading. They're so ashamed that they spend the rest of the time with behaviors that make people think that it's something else and not the fact that they're just struggling with learning how to read. And so and we were talking about how like reading aloud kind of can be a trigger in middle school for situations like that. And so what are things we can do to help them feel safe and successful to be able to actually read? Anyway, we're kind of just in the brainstorming phase of, we don't have a lot to go on, but we're trying to pull from different resources. And then it's the teacher training. So we're looking at thinking reading book from Diane and James Murphy. And it's what every secondary teacher needs to know about the science of reading and how to teach it. And so they've got a couple chapters specifically about intervention and what to look for in how to help struggling readers. When you're 12 or 13 in class and you're struggling to read, how do you help support them? And so we're looking at books like that to try and basically provide the background and PD for, like, if we actually were going to do morphology. And so anyway, our group was really brainstorming ideas about stuff like that.
That's fantastic. What can you give me the title of the book again?
You said thinking reading.
Well, mine's on and I couldn't, hold on just a second.
Or the author, either.
You said Diane and James Murphy? Okay, I'll put it into the chat box. As I heard you, Angela, and when you're talking about morphology, it made me think about when we did have in February our session where we did vocabulary, morphology, and background knowledge. For those who weren't with us, my favorite etymology site for learning about words at Etym Online, and then the One Look dictionary site for looking into prefixes and suffixes and roots or bases. So those are a couple of our favorites on that as well. Thanks, Angela, and thank you everyone for your contributions. We just have 20 minutes left, so our practice for application time, we're going to do actually. I could create a third room if you'd like to talk about semantics. This was our original plan, we had 4 rooms, and I combined the orthographic mapping and morphology and decoding. We have prompts for that and semantics, and then the grouping and meeting needs with some prompts that are in our Jamboard. This one is for the orthographic mapping, is so to look at a spelling analysis and look at the words that are used and thinking about how you would support your students with those words. Thank you, Effie, for putting that in for us. And we'll have to put it on the resource guide as well.
I did.
So, okay, great. So here's a spelling inventory that we would be looking at in the morphology and decoding and orthographic mapping room. Anything else if anybody wants to talk about that topic, orthography, morphology, decoding. The semantics room, if there's a volunteer who wants to lead that, if we want to have 3 rooms, what I can do is add on that one, and we can see who wants to go in that and kind of have a volunteer chatting. Effie, I think that you put this one together. Do you want to talk about this one?
Oh yeah, this was an activity. Again, it's coming back to me. And thinking about I love activities that are hands-on and that are sorting activities that really can help students create those lists and connections. So this is called use list group label, and I believe it was from Reading Rockets, I believe, and thinking about selecting a concept in a reading selection, and then have them brainstorm all the words that they can think about relating to the topic. And then you would list and show all the responses, no critiques about the responses. And that's another thing I love is activities that and strategies that have basically you can work not so many right or wrong answers to increase participation. Some words might not reflect the main concept, but that should hopefully work itself out and work itself through. So then the class would be divided into small groups, and each group will would take the words, the entire list of words that the class has created, and then put them into subcategories. And so those groups of words would emerge based on, and then they may struggle with where to put certain words, and they might leave them on a side or create an other group or something like that. That's entirely up to them. So there's so many learning opportunities within this. And then invite them to title or label the groups. And then as you come back together, justifying their reasoning for where they grouped. And that is so much of the learning is within that conversation. And again, this is another activity I like because there's very little, you need to be prepared in knowing your text. But other than that, there's very little physical prep with any of this. Yet it's a very engaging way to start talking about words. And then you can take it further and looking at the morphology of the words that were selected, or anything you want to do with that to build that semantics and understanding of the text through the words.
Thank you, Effie. And then last room would be on this grouping and meeting needs. And this is some kind of guides which we found from the IES guides, but how would you talk about finding out how your students' needs are being diagnosed? How can we design our groups based on the information that we collect? And how can we design that classroom instruction? How can we adjust it to be responsive to the needs of our groups? So I did make a copy of each of these in our Jamboard. So again, I'll take us to our Jamboard here, where you'll see that, and each group could take notes on these or just use these as reminders. So number 5 is the orthographic mapping and morphology and decoding. 6 is the semantics, and 7 is grouping or meeting needs. And then 8 is an invitation if you have to leave early to just leave with us something you've learned, why it matters to you, and what you plan or what you plan to do next. So at this point, I'm going to pause the recording and let you choose your breakout rooms. I did set it for 9 minutes, and hopefully that'll give us enough time to have a whole group conversation before 5:30. So resume recording. All right. So how about the group that didn't have Effie or me? If you'd like to talk first about your semantics piece, if there's somebody who would like to volunteer to chat and share with us about that, then I'll pull up the Jamboard and see if anything got put there. We didn't put anything, but we chatted.
We didn't put anything in the Jamboard.
Did anyone in your semantics group want to talk about what you take a look at or discussed?
I'll chat about semantics. So the reason I chose that group is because, like, I've been teaching math And so how do we really get reading into math? And part of this has kind of made me realize I do it a lot more than I think, because in the beginning of all my lessons, we always start with the objective, and I have the kids read that with me. And then I say, okay, well, do you guys know what these words mean? So we can figure out, and that kind of always brings it in. And then again, there's a lot of words, like when we learn new things, concepts, have you heard this before? Where have you heard it? And then how does it relate to when it's in here? How are they the same and how are they different? So
that's literacy and language development all rolled into there with your mathematical instruction.
Yep.
You know, Stephanie, my colleague that I work with, the math coordinator, we have these dreams of one day writing a math coffee table book for adults, so that it would have story problems that were of more of adult interest, that would actually help us teach teachers and people how to teach it, but make it fun, because it would be more about like cocktail measurements and things like that.
yep.
We're like trying to figure out when we can find time to do this, but on our off season.
In your spare time, right, Effie?
Yep.
Well, that's a good segue. Effie, we'll call on you next. Your group. What were
Yeah,
some-
so we talked about I was, what levels were being taught, and tying what kinds of data is being collected, and making sure you have data that is true to the reflection of the students' abilities, because students don't always show us their true skills, especially in certain computer-based assessments. And so looking at what other ways are buildings doing that. And one person was talking about tying the work with the being on the MTSS team, and pulling all that together. But the highest grade level in the group we were talking to is 6th grade. So we kind of kept it around the 3 through 6. But talking about that, there's so many more resources for elementary just out there than secondary.
It is more
And I
challenging.
shared the core multiple measures
Mhm.
guide, and I'll put it on the resource page as well. I'll put
Thank
it
you.
in here for everyone too.
I see it's 5:30, so I will be very brief. We talked about the need for doing this, continuing to learn about morphology and how much more you can dive in, and so much we can continue learning. In fact, we shared a few continuing learnings. I shared this book, the Beneath the Surface of Words, which really I feel like is a good intro on why spelling matters, but also onto morphology and the connections among words. And we also talked about the expert webinar series and the Washington Glean bundles that are still going to be available to us for another year, and how they're great segues into helping make sure that everyone continues to learn more. So I am seeing that it is 5:30, so we want to just appreciate everyone's work with us together, invite you, have our framework reminder, and invite you to take something with you. Hopefully that's something that you are taking that you can contribute and share out about into the Jamboard or into a chat. What's something you're taking away? Why was it meaningful? And what are you going to do next? That now what? So we do have ask you to just breathe. Here are those actually resources on the Glean things that we were talking, as well as then my flyer for my courses. My contact information, and Elizabeth's from ESG 189. Nina from 114, and Effie from 112. And we've also had Heidi Ayala from ESG, from OSPI. So we thank everyone from your engagement. I see a hand, and we thank you. Those of you who need to leave, have a great afternoon. And I hope I did resume recording. There we go. Go ahead, Leah. If you're able.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Thanks to the info, it was really useful. And then I'm assuming that we still have to fill out the survey through EDS, the PDF enroller.
So
To
you now that the course is completed, my secretary will put in attendance for every session and figure out how many sessions people attended, and then you will be eligible for
Mhm.
clock hours. You'll get an email in a couple of weeks.
Oh, we'll get an email. Okay. And then we'll do the survey on the TDF enroller.
Yes.
Yeah, it'll trigger you
Okay.
to do the survey.
Yeah, and then pay for the clock hours.
Right.
Actually,
Okay.
these ones are free, Leah, because they're through OSPI.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. I really
You're welcome.
appreciate it.
Have a great afternoon and a
Okay.
great summer.